Hey, everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Catholic Talk Show. Today, we're going to be talking about how to become a priest.
That's right. We're going to look at the process of becoming a priest, how to discern it, what the requirements are, what you can expect, and more.
And I look forward to sharing my testimony of how I came to discern the priesthood. But the most important thing is discernment. So let's talk about it.
All right, we talk a lot about our time in the seminary, your priesthood, discernment. And so there's a lot to unpack here. And I think a lot of people have been asking for this particular topic.
We have a lot of young men say, look, I'm really considering the priesthood. I'm a young guy, I'm 20, I'm watching your show. I see how Father Rich lives. I see how other priests live. And it's something that I really am considering that I might have a calling towards. Can you help us? Can you talk about this and some things that we might expect? So we wanted to do that today.
Yeah, and this show's for you, and it's really for everybody out there, because something that we've talked about in the past is the need to encourage and culture an atmosphere of discernment, for all people, and it's by the process of that, really interiorly discerning God's voice in your life. What is He calling you to learn those techniques is very, very helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's start with, I think, the first place to start off is, are you even qualified to be a priest? Because there's some requirements that can't be gotten around no matter how much you discern. Number one, you got to be a dude, okay? John Paul closed that. So for all you women out there who want to be a priest, my apologies, not up for us, not up for even the church to make it available to you. It's not something that the church is holding back from you. It's something the church can't do. The church cannot make women into priests. So that's one. The second is you have to be between 17 and 55. So for all my brothers out there who are 65 years old, retired, and looking for a second career or something to do during retirement, it's not really open to you because there's I guess, some practicalities about age that make it not available to you.
And the bishop can decide
certain cases.
Yeah, in certain cases, like the bishop can really do whatever he wants. Right. But the other aspect of this canonically too, if somebody, I don't know if you guys know this, but if somebody attempts suicide or self-harm to that point, is also prohibited from the clerical state.
Wow.
Got to have hands.
You got to have hands.
Do you still?
Actually, they relaxed. It's not the same.
There was one saint, and I'm sorry, I can't remember, but he had a disfigured hand. Yeah. And they said, well, because your hand is disfigured, you can't celebrate the Mass, so you can't be in priesthood. And he got a dispensation. This is like in the 1600s.
Yeah.
I wish I remembered his name, but I don't.
And I don't think that canon is still in there.
Okay.
Yeah.
Another big thing is you can't have a bunch of debt, right? You don't
or kids that you're financially supporting.
Well, you can't have kids.
But you can have kids.
There's plenty of priests that have kids.
Yeah. They have to be grown.
Oh, grown.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I thought, Delacrosse, you can't take your 6-year-old kids and be like, hey, I'm going to become a priest now.
Even if my wife died and all my kids were grown, there's a chance there.
But you can't have big financial debt, right? You can't come to the church and say, look, I got $50,000 in student loans. I owe $65,000 in credit card debt. I've got a house and a mortgage. You want to take me in? And the church is like, I'm sorry, you got to get your life put together first.
A lot of religious communities, definitely approach that.
Yeah.
I knew a guy in our young adult group that he wanted to become a priest, and the debt held him back.
There was a lot of people that I met too along the way where their student loans, they had to resolve their student loans before they went in.
And there's for anybody who's considering the priesthood and who has student loans and that's holding you back, there's a lot of groups out there that will help you pay them off.
That's right.
Because they want to support the priesthood. But they'll also vet you so that you're not just going to get a free check, right? They help you work that out and make you eligible.
That was the thing that I was upset about, like when I was studying at Ave and discerning priesthood, is they had like wonderful scholarships at the time because they were supporting vocations, a lot of the patrons of the university. And but there were guys that were just joining the pre-theologate just to get those types of scholarships and really not taking discernment seriously.
Yeah. And then a couple other requirements that aren't the same across the board, but it's you can't convert and then the next week enter the seminary.
Yeah.
Typically, they want you to wait 2-3 years, right? They want you to have a little seasoning on you. And if you've discerned out of another order or another diocese, they typically want you to have a little cooling off period of maybe a year or two as well. So those are some very, very broad requirements, just in case any of those things would rule you out. But, Father Rich, why did you decide to become a priest? I mean, what's your story? What made you, how does that work out in your head, in your heart, practically? Where'd you have to go to school? Like, what's that look like for a person?
Yeah, for me, priesthood was never in the radar at all. Like, there was no way that I would even have given it a second thought growing up. But when I turned 20, really when I was 19, and I was in New Jersey, I was walking on, practicing with the basketball team, and just kind of living life. I had a couple of sincere moments of being affected by God's love. I would pass by Our Lady of Mercy in Park Ridge, New Jersey, on the way to school, and I would make the sign of the cross because that's how I was always raised. Whenever you pass a church, and I stopped in one day and went to confession for the first time in years, and there was a priest in there. The church was empty, and that was like a big moment of realizing God's pursuing love.
What called you into that church? I know you drove past it, but what made you say, I'm stopping and going in?
It was, I just felt this gut instinct feeling like, just stop. You've got time this morning. Stop and go see the church. And I went up to the church, opened up the door was open, and I just felt very led by God to do that. And then I was walking around looking at the stained glass windows. It was really quiet, and I was loving it, and I hadn't darkened the door of a church for a while at that point. And then all of a sudden this old guy came out of nowhere. I didn't see him at all. And he said, "Hey, go in there." And he pointed, and a priest I walked in. I'm like, all right, whatever. Like I went in, and I looked around the corner, and there was a priest sitting with a purple stole on. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm going to confession. Like the priest sat down and dude, I just lost it. I just cried my eyes out. I was so
You cry?
Believe it or not, man. It just all
And you weren't going in there seeking confession.
No, not at all. And I just repented spiritually by the gift of God. Like it wasn't something that I prayed about. It just happened. So that was a big moment in my life where I felt like God was pursuing me.
Do you remember who that priest was?
No.
Crazy.
Yeah. And so from there, that was the first huge moment. Like, whoa, I fell off the wagon, and that first mass, my penance was to go to mass that weekend, and it was John the Baptist, the feast of John the Baptist. And then I came back to Florida for knee surgery, kind of fell off the wagon and got swallowed up in darkness. And then it was after my second knee surgery that God just blew up my life when I opened up the scriptures. I prayed, and there was a Bible that miraculously showed up on my kitchen counter. Don't know how it got there. I crutched back to my room with this Bible, and I
you were
opened it
recovering
up.
from knee surgery at the time.
Yeah, and I had a lot of time on my hands. And I just started reading the scriptures. I wound up getting a catechism from my grandmother and got every type of religious movie. And I just started digging in, man. And it was absolutely life-changing. And just realizing the love of God, very charismatically with different dreams and experiences, praying the rosary, learning all of that stuff as I was recovering.
It's
on
very
the,
much like
on
St.
the vet.
Ignatius.
Yeah, and there's there's a lot. I think there's a lot of
St. Ignatius
relatability.
he got his knee blown out by a cannonball, couldn't move, so he's stuck there, and he's kind of a rascal. So they stocked his room of all religious books, and he was stuck there and didn't have any other options. It's kind of sounds similar to me.
And I got hit by the Holy Spirit big time, over and over again. I'm like, wow, the love of God is real. Like the scriptures, really began to transform my life. So I started going back to church and just corralling all of my friends and forcing them to go to church. I was just picking them up and you're coming with me, God's real. And I just began to give testimony to the experience. I started taking classes at the community college and got the youth director's position at the church, but still never really thought like priesthood, because I always wanted to get married. I always wanted to have kids, and it was in the process of dating a bunch of girls. Like I was showing, I was just
a bunch of girls all at once.
Well, wow. I mean, it was, I was really trying to find somebody that, want to get married to, and like relationships weren't working out, so I'd just we'd date for a little bit, and then I'd kind of move on, and I would take these girls to Father John Tetlow, and he was the vocations director at the time, and I would just always introduce him, like, wow, what do you think about her? And he was always super nice. He's like, oh yeah, I like her a lot, buddy. Like, she's great.
All your girlfriends are going through your phone like, who's this Jesus you always text in?
Well, one of the girls actually was super jealous of my relationship with Father Tetlow. I'm like, how would you be jealous of my relationship with a priest? It was the weirdest thing. And, so did not start discerning, even though at that point I was working at the church every day, falling in love with the ministry
as a youth director.
As a youth director, I was basically the handyman. Anything that Father John needed, I did, and I visited nursing homes and hospital calls, communions to the sick, all that type of stuff. I started doing. I'm like, this is beautiful, man. I could do this for the rest of my life. Yeah. But it didn't connect for me in my brain. Like maybe God's calling me to the priesthood, and then people started expressing me like, oh, Richard, you'd be a good priest. You should be a priest. You should be a priest. And it didn't register at all. And it wasn't until John Paul II was declining in health, and they were, just blowing up his life online and on the news and stuff, and just really experiencing firsthand, like, God calls just normal guys. Like I've never felt like, I'm going to be this awesome priest or whatever. Like God calls regular, normal guys, and JP2 was that example for me. So that's when everything started to stir in my heart, and I started being open to the call. Delacrosse went in a year before me, and that was also huge because at the time there wasn't really a ton of vocations in the diocese. So to have somebody that is just still a lifelong friend go in front of me, it kind of opened up the door, and then I had just a powerful experience where it was undeniable that I really needed to look at this and really open myself up to the process of discernment. And that's the thing about discernment. It's like, it's not just my personal thought, like, hey, I think I'm called to be a priest. It's the church discerning my vocation too. Like, it's my superiors. It's the rector of the seminary. It's the faculty. It's the staff. It's my peers. Like, do my peers, do my superiors see the priesthood in me? Mm-hmm. Like, do they recognize priestly character? Yeah. And that's an important factor of all of it.
Well, because you have to be accepted, right? Mm-hmm. You can't just say, well, I'm going to become a priest, whether you like it or not. I mean, there is a level of acceptance to that.
And not only acceptance, but like literally the call.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So the bishop calls you to orders. That's an important factor in all this.
So I guess that's how you kind of end up in seminary, right? I mean, how does the bishop know to call you? Like, what happens?
So the bishop calls you to orders after a period of discernment from the church. So out of the good reputation that one may have, do you know him to be noble? Do you know him to be worthy of this calling?
Do you have to ask to be considered for that? Or do they say, hey, you'd make a good priest, and the bishop calls you? How's that work?
Well, it's through the seminary. So you have to enter the seminary, and you have to enter into years of formation and relationship with
discernment.
So how do you enter the seminary? What's that process look like? Because I think a lot of people wonder about that.
And that's the thing. It's like, if you're out there just like, hey, how would I enter the seminary? Just call the vocations office. Call the vocations office. Every single diocese has a vocations office. You could find their number on the web. And, for me, it was easy because Father Tetlow was the vocations director. And, he put me in touch with, his assistant, got the paperwork in, and I sat down and I was interviewed by a diocesan committee with the bishop. Mm-hmm. And they asked me all sorts of questions, my devotion to Our Lady and, things about my past, my history, all of that. And they approved me for candidacy and going into the seminary. and they affiliated me as an official person who's discerning. So there's some paperwork involved. There's a psych eval as well. So you go through a psychological evaluation. There's that interviewing process, and then once
What
you
are those
get
interviews
into
like?
It's nothing. Like, I was super nervous.
I'm sure.
Yeah, me too.
I was really, really nervous. I remember after answering all the questions, I'm like, that was terrible. Like, and I went into the chapel and I'm praying. I'm like, Jesus, like, if you're calling me to this, like, please just, make him be merciful. And like,
What kind of question they ask you?
all sorts of stuff. Like, I put, you put personal information. You present your, autobiography.
Yeah.
So they ask you about decisions that you made in your life, or, if you partied, like they ask you about that. They, relationship questions.
So it's pretty digging.
It's personal.
Yeah.
I'll never forget my interview. There's a lot of people in there.
Yeah.
It's kind of,
And they put you at the head of the
they
table.
put you at the head of the table. It's kind of scary. And the bishop was at the very far end, and he was pretty small. Bishop Gallion, he's a small guy, so you really couldn't make him, see him unless you kind of, because he was just there, doodling notes and stuff. And so one of the ladies like, well, you're partying, like, when you party, did you just party by yourself? And I was like, oh no, man. I had really big parties. Like I was explaining.
It's kind of a big deal in Jacksonville.
Well, I didn't know how much information I needed to give them, and I didn't know where they were going. So I kind of just started talking about, some of the parties that I had.
And then one of the committee members, this old lady, was like, I was at one of those parties.
No, but I'll never forget sweet Bishop Gallion. Just a very passionate, sweet guy. He kind of like peers his head out of the table, and he's at the end. So nobody really sees him doing this. And he's like, no, like, just stop.
He told you to stop?
Yeah, he just kind of looked out and he's just like, yeah, you're good, man. Like, just reel it in.
Land the plane.
And just the feeling of after that to sit down with him and for him to say that I reminded him of St. Augustine. And he gave me a book about St. Augustine. He was, read this. This guy has your story. So like just the compassion and the passion that he had just for me as a person and the care for my soul to sit down with me. And obviously he has to accept you, but he's like, I'm really grateful that you're going to be joining us in the seminary. That was just a really awesome moment for me, in that whole process.
And it's so affirming.
It is.
Because when a bishop is telling you, like, I'm going to affiliate you, you're a seminarian, he's essentially saying, like, what's happening in your heart and soul is like
Validated.
real. Like this is really happening in your life. And to have that affirmation spiritually is immensely supportive and fatherly, and in all respect. Like Bishop Gallion affiliated me too. And it was a big deal because when I gave that talk about being open to the vocation.
So Bishop Gallion accepted both of you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know what question is judgment.
Well, the issue though for me was Bishop Gallion did not like my talk that I gave that day about being open to the call. Like he did not like it at all. Weird. So, and that came. So now it's like,
what didn't he like about it? I
don't know. I was using like the purpose-driven life to like base the talk on like vocation. I was just a fired up, 21, 22-year-old.
He had his old school Italian peculiarities. You know what I mean?
And like an example of this with Gallion, super smart, like, and knew tons of languages. And he was on a committee when they were revising the liturgy and looking at the Latin. And I'm doing a consecration to the Blessed Mother, and I'm in the cathedral, and I'm praying, and he comes out of nowhere and he says, "Richard, what are you doing for dinner?" I said, "Nothing, Excellency." He said, "Have dinner with me tonight." I said, "Okay, Bishop, thank you. I'm just going to finish and I'll come over to the cathedral, to the rectory." And so I go over there, we sit down, and it's quiet and it's awkward, and I'm just sitting there, and he starts to say, "Richard, they want to translate the second Eucharistic prayer that the Holy Spirit would come over these gifts like dew." The dew fall.
Lick the doofall.
And he said, and then he goes, Richard, can you imagine the little children in the congregation saying, Mama, why the Holy Spirit go doo-doo on Jesus?
Oh my God.
And bro, like I lost it. Like I just started laughing hysterically. I'm like dying laughing. And he looks at me and says, Richard, you laugh, but it is not funny. And I'm like,
Oh, dude, that's so awkward.
it was so awkward. So, I mean, this has been my relationship with Bishop Gallione from the beginning. So I'm like, oh man, he's not going to affiliate me. He's not going to, and then he was so impressed with the formation that I was receiving at Ave Maria. Like he saw how, where I was a year before to like this kind of the transformation that he saw. Because I was raw, man. We were both really, really, really raw. And so it was just such a blessing, man. And receiving that affirmation, going to the seminary, he let me stay at Ave Maria. So he let me continue my formation. I was an endorsed seminarian for the diocese. And then from there, he put me at St. Vincent's. And St. Vincent's is the major seminary. So typically, you're looking at anywhere from 6 to 9 years in formation.
So
in the seminary.
So were they paying for Ave Maria for you?
At the time I was taking, I had student loans, but I also had scholarships and stuff like that. Yeah.
But then seminary, they will pay for you.
They pay, yeah. And even if they send you to the minor seminary, they pay as well.
Right. But if you leave the seminary, are you on the hook for that?
Well, that's the way I feel it should be.
Yeah.
And they should treat it like a loan, like a diocesan loan
like an
for
investment.
formation. Yeah, it's an
but
investment.
Is it though?
It's not.
It's
so
not.
Yeah, okay. And that that affects the budget. That's why most dioceses give to your stewardship appeal, give to your bishop's stewardship appeal. It's not cheap to run these seminaries, and all the bishops have the responsibility of running these seminaries. And you want good seminaries, you want good professors, and I'm grateful that I went to St. Vincent's and developed all the relationships with the guys from the state of Florida and the teachers I had, and very, very proud to be an alumnus there as well.
So I think also the educational part, if you have a college degree, usually you're on a different track than if you have not had a college degree. So there's a different variety of institutions that they would send you to. So not necessarily the diocesan institution, but they might have, a stake in another seminary that the formations for older men.
Yeah, guys who have been married and now they're widowed.
Right.
And then they go to a John the 23rd, in Boston, and that's a 4-year program. So they're really basing a lot of, their experience, their professional careers, their education, and they really focus in on those 4 years of intensive study.
Well, let's talk about the common denominators of what to expect in a seminary, regardless of your educational formation. For me, I went in during the crisis, right? When all you heard about was all this craziness going on. And I thought the guys that I were going to be seeing, they were going to be effeminate. I thought they were, I had these projections in my mind that were given to me from the media. And and I arrived at this seminary and we had the best basketball games. I mean, we were throwing elbows, games, man. And there's a lot of young guys just that we're still friends with today. And it's set up to where you learn the philosophy of the church first, right? So before you study theology, generally speaking,
your undergrad degree is in philosophy.
And that was, for me, that was life-changing. You have the liturgical, environment. You have formation advisors for your spiritual advisor. You have a human formation advisor, and then you have an academic advisor. So, or they might be woven into just one person that advises you there. So you have this process of discernment that's still open. And I would encourage men, if you don't know, right? You don't know about the calling. The seminary is the best place to find out.
That's exactly it.
It is the best place to find out.
And I think it would be valuable to know too that there's internal formators and then there's external formators.
What's the difference?
And the internal formators is in confidence. So that's like your confessor, essentially. So you're going to confession to your confessor or your spiritual director. So that's more internal form. External form is your academic, your pastoral formator, that's in charge of your
music
pastoral
teacher
assignment. Sister Joyce Lavoie.
Love that woman.
Yeah, me too.
We almost thought you were triangle the other day.
Still alive?
Yeah, don't say that.
Sister Joy, if you're hearing this, he's still how he was when you knew him.
And Sister Joyce, you got to know too that could you imagine both of us together at the major seminary? Thank goodness that never happened.
Yes.
I would walk into choir and be like, "My sister, how are you doing, my sister?"
Oh, you guys are insufferable. They've been terrible.
We had some fun, man. That was a lot of fun.
So those are the kinds of classes like in seminary. So you're taking like philosophy, you're taking like theology, like literature.
It's liberal arts, man. Like
it's like going to college.
Yeah, it's going to college. So it's a liberal arts degree, and you're basically focusing in on philosophy, but you're taking history, you're taking
But the
English
environment
literature.
of the seminary is centered around obviously daily mass, the liturgy of the hours, external events might include a visit to, a senior home or, feeding the poor.
And that's weekly commitments. And you have house jobs too.
Right. You have house
This
jobs.
is minor seminary.
Minor and major.
What's the difference?
So minor is where you're getting your undergrad degree. Major is where you're getting your master's degree.
Theology.
So yeah, and it's a master in divinity.
Okay.
Yeah. So I guess the point I was trying to make is that unlike a university where you're going to class, you're socializing with people around you, you're going to restaurants and all this, the seminary really is just kind of like a
monastic.
It's a place where you live in community, like almost like a religious order, but not. But the environment itself lends to a deeper prayer, a deeper fraternity with brothers. Everybody's on the same path to discerning the priesthood. And it's kind of a cloister, if you will. There's an element to that to where you're really not in too much contact with the outside world.
And that was our regional seminary. There's other seminaries that are associated with universities, so they're going to classes with other university students.
Like CUA or something.
Yeah. So there's different ones, but certainly for the region, that was our experience.
What do you wear there? And when do you get the cassock?
So we really didn't wear the cassock at all unless you were serving. You really don't wear your collar until candidacy, really, and then certainly as a transitional deacon, that's when you're wearing your.
Does everybody do a pastoral year? Why don't you talk a little bit about that?
So within a 5-year master's program, one of those years is experiential. So you do a pastoral year. And again, that's also, it depends. Like some of the guys that go to Rome, they don't get some of them aren't required to have a pastoral year. Some guys request a pastoral year. Like Father Clay requested a pastoral year. So, it gives you an opportunity of getting in the parish, learning the day-to-day operations, which is so valuable. Yeah. And I highly recommend that everybody have that experience. So
like
even
an internship.
Even if you're discerning the priesthood, like get involved in the church first. Like don't just like come at it from like, maybe I'll become a priest. Like that's a good idea. You need to kind of really enter into a active role within the church, whether that's visiting the sick, whether that's youth ministry, whether that's catechesis, whether it's, praying the rosary with the rosary ministry after, whatever it is, but like enter into an active role, just so that you can kind of feel out like, do I want to be a public person?
Do I see myself?
Do I see myself in this environment? Do I feel called to do this type of work? That's kind of helpful before you even get in. Some guys go into the seminary and they haven't even spent any time
in ministry
or doing that. I came from the other side of it where I was working every single day. I had the keys. I was responding to calls in the middle of the night. I knew the operations.
Father Tetlow gave you a lot of accessibility to the ministry of the church.
So true.
And I think it was because he saw in you a passion and a sincere desire to help. But I think that was really a very pivotal thing, just looking at you from the outside, that was a very pivotal thing.
It's like an apprenticeship.
Yeah. I mean, he is, Father Tetlow is he's just a force. And
to trust me, dude. I was like 21. I was 21 years old, and he trusted me with everything.
Yeah, and just talking about Father Tetlow, one of the most amazing experiences I had with him was we went around. He prayed at Chinacolo. We went and visited some people, and like it was such a full day of watching him be a priest. And we went back to his rectory because I was staying there because I was in the seminary. And I just remember him just disappearing to his room. We were all exhausted, and he was just laying down in his bed. And he's like, Ryan, can you imagine coming home to a wife? He says, I'm just so full of God's love right now. I don't think I can actually, pour it out to somebody and then make, So it's just kind of like understanding his mindset of just giving in the church, and the energy that is created from that he just possesses with himself, with Jesus, you know, and just being able to see that it's very fortunate. You're very fortunate to have somebody where you can see the priesthood, in somebody.
It was like, I believe it was like a year and a half to almost 2 years that I was there in the parish working before I went to Ave Maria. And, seeing that on a day-to-day basis was absolutely impressive to me. And it's true. And shadowing a priest, that's the whole concept of the pastoral year.
Yep.
Is really shadowing the priest on the day-to-day level. It's hit or miss, it's hit or miss where,
Right.
But it just depends on the priest.
Sometimes you shadow Mike Schmidt, sometimes you shadow Pagano. I mean, it's a big difference.
So it was, that 5-year master's program is basically split down the middle with that pastoral experiential, thing that we call pastoral year. So you have the first 2 years, first theology, second theology, and then you finish in the third and the fourth. Essentially the third, that's when you're ordained a transitional deacon.
I wanted to talk about that real quick.
Sure.
So there's minor orders, right? And they don't call them the minor orders anymore. They call them the ministries. But throughout all of the history of the church, it was the minor orders. And that's porter, lector, exorcist, and acolyte. And then transitional deacon. Is there anything of that tradition left? Because I know that you still have to do those ministries, like kind of like in 6-month intervals. Like, what was that like?
The installation of being a lector in the church, that's like universally. You're installed universally in the church.
That's like, and you actually get hands laid on for that, right?
Yeah. So,
but you're not technically
and like
a
you wouldn't be
cleric, though.
delegated at another parish. Like you've already been installed as a lector in the church. Same thing with acolyte. You're installed as an acolyte, and you're there to prepare the altar and to prepare this for the celebration.
And they can't take that away from you, even if you don't become a priest.
No. So he's still an installed lector.
He's Hannibal Lecter.
So yeah, those installation and rites of becoming are still very, very much a part of the journey toward the priesthood.
So if you discern out between your transitional deacon and becoming a priest, you discern out somewhere in between there.
You have to appeal to Rome. If you're a transitional deacon,
you have to appeal to Rome.
Yeah, because you have valid orders.
You are a cleric at that point, So you have to be laicized. Yeah.
You have to be laicized. You can't be a deacon in the church later. Okay.
No. Because it's a transitional deacon. It's different than a permanent deacon.
Gotcha.
And the intent is
correct.
different.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
And if you're ordained a deacon, it's not like, oh yeah, I kind of want to get married. Like, and that's even in the Eastern rite.
Yeah.
So it's like once you get ordained and you're not married,
that's it.
In the Eastern rite.
Yep. So even if you were a deacon now, and you're a lay person, you're not married, and you become a permanent deacon, you can't get married after becoming a deacon.
Correct.
I mean, it's pretty interesting.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
It is.
So,
it's a consecrated life. I mean, you're consecrating your life to the mission.
After those orders, like at what point in college do you become that transitional deacon? What's that point, and what is a transitional deacon?
So a transitional deacon, there's really, in function, there's no difference between a permanent deacon or a transitional deacon. The issue with the transitional deacon, it's really an experiential year where you are sacramentally functioning in the church.
So you could do baptisms. You can
everything a deacon can do. You can do as a transitional deacon. So offering reflections, funeral liturgies, house blessings within liturgies, all of those types of functions.
Nice.
Yeah.
And how long are you a transitional deacon? Like, what's the time period?
Like within a year, you're going to get ordained. Yeah.
Okay.
For the most part.
So if you get made transitional deacon, they're pretty much sure that you're going to be a priest. I mean, is
And
your
so- and
ordination
so
already
is the
scheduled?
candidate.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
And so is the candidate. The candidates.
Yeah.
It's probably pretty rare.
Unless serious concerns come up.
Right.
If serious concerns come up, then there's adjustments made, and there could be a postponement or a delay in the ordination, or in certain circumstances, one is released from the clerical state and laicized.
And then when you become a transitional deacon, that's when you start wearing the collar and everything. Yeah.
Yep, because you're a cleric
Yeah.
at that point.
So when you graduate, does the bishop send you a letter and say, hey,
So that's where the call to orders comes in. Like, I received my call to orders in preparation for my priestly ordination the same day that Pope Francis was elected. So I received word the same day that I received word from Rome that we have a new pope, which was a really cool moment. I actually shared that with Bishop Lessard. God rest his soul. Beautiful, beautiful man.
I was in the seminary when Benedict was elected pope. We were in the seminary watching.
Yeah.
It was pretty cool.
Yep. And I was
I was at a bar. I was
at Santa Maria del Mar, and I was working that day, and we brought in a TV into the office and watched.
I was like 23 or something like that, 24. I was on a business trip. Like one of the first business trips I ever taken as like, young man. I got a thing, and it's like I've never been away from home by myself, and I'm like, I'm gonna go sit in the bar,
Bring your briefcase into the bar, put it up on the...
And I'm sitting in the bar, and I'm like, oh, the election, the conclave's still going on. And I remember and here's the funny thing. I was in a bar in Orlando when Benedict was elected. I was in the same bar and same hotel when Francis was elected.
Wow.
Yeah.
Dang.
That's crazy.
Yeah, it's a hotel bar somewhere in Orlando that we would stay at a lot. Yeah. So next time,
I'll meet you at that bar.
Yeah, we're gonna be watching the news. We're like, how was Papum? Ricardo Pagano, and you're like, oh, dude, buy me a shot. So preparing for your ordination. Anything that happens, you have to go shopping at the priest store to get all your new priest clothes.
You're typically already have that. There was a lot of patrimony when I was going through. So guys would send in clerics that they weren't using anymore. They got new clerics and they passed them down to the guys at the seminary. So I still try to do that occasionally, send a box down.
They're like, who sent all these fart-smelling faded clothes in? No thanks.
And so I had a bunch of that stuff. And then people give you gifts, man. When you're newly ordained, I mean, people load you up with everything that you really need.
Yeah, like chalice,
chalice and chasubles. And
I was at your ordination, and it was a really awesome party afterwards, and you got a lot of gifts.
Yeah, it was impressive, man. And
it's like your marriage. I mean, it's pretty big.
I danced with my mama out at the mission grounds, man. That reception was beautiful, and big shout out to the community in St. Augustine and Kevin Partel, because they really put together the tent out there and the stage, and we had music, and we were singing "I Got Friends in Low Places," and danced with my mother that night to the song of Augustine, and it's a beautiful song about Augustine's love for his mother, Monica, and very special night.
What are you thinking of when the ordination is going on? I know you have to lay prostrate on the floor.
Dude,
and
I
all
was
that.
sick as a dog.
Really?
It was probably one of the worst sicknesses I've ever had. I was coughing up black stuff. I passed out. So this is crazy. So
Maybe that was Satan leaving the body.
Exercise.
it was a crazy sickness. So it's really, really.
He's like, there goes the neighborhood. I got to bounce.
Wonderful, wonderful Catholic guy, Arbizani in St. Augustine hooked my my family and my close friends up. He's got this big property right next to the cathedral, walking distance, and he said, Rich, you could use the house. Awesome, but the AC went out. I was sick. This is the night before my ordination. I'd been like out of contact with everybody, everybody's having fun. I'm like in my room, and people are coming in from all over the place. And then so Tetlo's like, Rich, I'll turn in some points. I'll get you a room at the Hilton so you could get a good night's sleep. I'm like, appreciate it. So I went over there with him and a seminarian at the time, Troy Fulford. go up to the room, and I'm just like out of it, man. And so they set me up, they split, and I lay down and I just start coughing, and I couldn't stop coughing. And I coughed to the point where I passed out. And then I woke up and went downstairs. All I wanted was grapefruit. So I'm sitting there with Tetlow eating grapefruit, and I get a call. And it's my buddy Joe Gates, who's a priest down in Venice, and he's like, "Oh my gosh, Richard, they're gonna tow your car." I'm like, "What are you talking about?" So the neighbor, he's like, "You parked in the wrong spot." He's got the landscapers coming in, and now it's like probably 45 minutes to my ordination. So now I gotta walk down Hippolyta across the city to get the car to move it. And I walk up, and Joe's like frantic. He's like, pacing. And so like, and Joe has this little tiny car, and he's blocking like 2 parking spots. And I'm like, "Joe, you think you'd move the car? Could you move the car, please?" So he runs over. I get in my car. I turn it on. I turn the AC on, and I'm like, I'm just frustrated. I'm sick. I'm like, this is the day of my ordination. This is crazy. and I look out of the corner of my eye, and Father Tim Holita, comes out of the gate, and he looks over at me, and he lights up a cigarette, and he's just like, And I just look out, whatever, like I don't even want to make eye contact. He beelines it over to my car and starts punching my window. Bang, 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 bang. And he's, "Why don't you move your car?" And when he did that, I laughed so hard. It was one of the funniest things I've ever heard. "Why don't you move your car?" And I pull the car up, I park it in the right spot, and he looked at me, he's like, "How about we get you ordained today, huh?" And I'm like, "Yeah." So I went in, got changed. Dude, I walked to the cathedral like within like 2 minutes to my ordination. Everybody was lined up.
You were late almost?
I wasn't late. I showed up on time. But like,
ain't that the case?
I walked in, shook the hand. There was 3 bishops. Shook the hands of the bishops. Then I shook the hands of like Monsignor Brennan and Monsignor Hooley and like all the executive crew of the bishop. And then I put the chasuble on, and I put the dalmatic or whatever. And we processed out, man, and I got ordained. But
wow, he's such a goon.
The whole experience, man. I mean, I had cough drops in my mouth. And like from that day on, I always have a cough drop with me, like because I have to have a cough drop because I get attacked here all the time.
You need the intercession of St. Blaise, bro.
Dude, St. Blaise and my boy Felix Varela, he's another one that I want to see canonized in the church. But he had asthma, and I would not want it any other way. I would not want it any other way. It was a beautiful experience. I'm glad that I was sick, man. And it's like, offer what you have. Right? Like I didn't.
So you get ordained, you have this party.
Yeah.
And then does the bishop say you're going here, you're going there? Or
Sometimes
do you
bishops tell you at the ordination. Sometimes it's before. It just depends on the bishop.
Okay. And you literally just get in your car and drive to that parish, and that's it.
Yep, and then you start there, yeah.
Wow. I see, if I was bishop, I'd tell them after the ordination, because if they were getting a clunker of a parish, I wouldn't want them leaving me at the altar,
That's right.
You know, it was funny, though, like, so I get sent to St. Elizabeth Ann Seton, and I get my letter of appointment. St. Elizabeth Ann Seton, and they gave me a second job at St. Joseph Academy.
Do they even give you like a week in between, or is it like boom right to?
No, there was time.
Like
I was able to go on
honeymoon?
pilgrimage, and I went, and the sickness didn't lift until I was in Europe, and I went to Medjugorje, I went to Rome, celebrated Mass at the altar of JP2, which was amazing.
Ooh.
I had to say thank you to my boy, man. He got me through a lot.
That's cool.
So that was really cool. So then I show up at the parish, and the pastor he took vacation. So,
oh my gosh!
So he wasn't there that weekend. So I go I go to my office and I look at the liturgical schedule for the weekend. I got a bunch of masses, and it's like,
how many masses have you said at this point?
Not many.
Like 5?
Yeah, not many. And I look and it says Pagano SP in parentheses. I'm like, I think I know what that means.
Spanish?
I said, I'm just going to go talk with the business manager. So I went in and I said, hey, I see, Pagano SP. I said, what does that mean? He says, oh, the Spanish Mass. I said, you realize I don't speak Spanish, right? And she's like, oh, we thought you did. I said, well, we're going to find out. So I went in. I celebrated the Spanish Mass.
I mean, you can speak enough Spanish.
Yeah, I could pronounce. Like at that time, all I could do was really pronounce and read the word. So I
So
read.
if you're doing Spanish, how
the
come not
homily.
Latin modernist?
Dominus vobiscum.
Et cum spiritu tuo.
Hey man, I could.
So
do
you
it.
write a homily and then you hit the translate button on Google or something?
No, like they have this awesome website I found. I contacted some of my friends and it was like, gave you a Spanish homily.
Oh.
So I did that for a while. And then I asked the community, I said, do y'all want me to, read my homily in Spanish or do you want me to preach in Spanglish? And they were like, preach in Spanglish. So then I'd be sitting there giving a homily and I'd be like, "Como se dice?" And then they would give me the word back.
Funny.
It was a lot of I miss the Spanish community. That's when I got really, really comfortable with celebrating Mass in a different language, and I absolutely loved it.
What was your first Mass like?
Dude, that was Sunrise Mass, Feast of Pentecost. I was ordained on JP2's birthday. The very next day was the Feast of Pentecost, and sunrise at the rustic altar in St. Augustine.
That's the one looking right straight to the water,
Yeah,
right? That's
yeah.
like the recreation of the.
Yeah.
Okay. I remember that place. That was awesome.
the original that
It's the same spot.
Yeah, exactly. With 100% certainty, that's where they erected the
So
altar.
that's where the first Mass in America was said.
Well, technically, the first Mass in America was said in St. Pete. So on the West Coast, this was the first Mass celebrated where the colonization effort in America and the first community was successful and they didn't die. So, that was a huge, a lot of the other attempts failed. So the first Mass technically was the Diocese of St. Augustine, I might add. St. Pete was carved out later, but nonetheless, it was actually on the West Coast. But we have the first parish, we have the first, everything, school, all of that.
How'd you manage in your first Mass? You mess up?
Dude, I felt like I've been doing it my whole life. That was the feeling. Like I felt very, very. It was very natural.
I mean, I'm sure they teach you on rubrics, but I mean, do you go through the whole Mass?
Oh yeah, you go through that in class.
Yeah.
So when you get later in your program, in your master's program, you're focusing more on the practicalities of what you do on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, I remember one time in the major seminary, I walked into the room where we all watch TV, and there was a guy in there practicing. I'm like, oh, that's what those guys do later on. He's just practicing the Mass.
Yeah.
Wait, you said he's in the order of lector still? Mm-hmm. Do you remember him being a lector in Houston?
Oh, that was the best.
It is one of the funniest things I've ever seen.
Oh, I know. He grabbed the scriptures in the Magnificat, and he reads his first reading, and then he looks around like,
Hey, I wanna do the second
does anybody
reading?
want to do the second reading? Like,
No.
But he kind of mumbled it, like he didn't like say it clearly, and he's like looking around, he's like,
Fine.
and then he just went right back in.
And then Pagano looks at me, and I almost,
Oh yeah, it was funny.
my lungs almost collapsed. It was
It
great.
was funny. That was a feast of St. Joseph, the solemnity.
Any advice? I mean, I think this is a really good overview.
Yeah.
Right. This is kind of practical. Two dudes who went to the seminary, the kinds of things that you experience. Any other advice or anything that, might not be right off the top of the mind, something people would think about entering the seminary that you'd want to share with them?
I always wrestled with what Bishop Gallione used to say. But I believe, like now I believe, and I think I know what he meant. Because
About the dewfall?
when like kids would like come up, like, maybe I'll be a priest or whatever, he was always very stern, and he'd be like, only if God calls you, you become a priest. And I was always thinking, like, we need priests, man. Bishop, come on. Like, it's great to be a priest. But it's absolutely true, man. Like living this life, it is a vocation. And it will call you to holiness, and it will, it's challenging. It's a challenging life. It'll bring you to your knees every day. It's the most beautiful life. But don't pursue it unless you're being called by God to do it.
Yeah, otherwise you just get drug along.
Yeah, and you'll be miserable.
Fish out of water.
Yeah, and you'll be miserable. If you don't have that intimate relationship with Christ and you're feeling that call and you're it's like, and people are recognizing it in you too. Like people are affirming it and they're seeing that priestly character in you. Like discern that, but discern the voice of Christ. Hear him calling you to the priesthood. That's what's going to hold you through every storm.
Yeah, I think a lot of people might have the potential to romanticize being a priest. Like, oh, I'm going to get the collar, I'm going to get the vestments,
totally.
say mass.
And
but then the reality is like, you know, I got to go to a hospital and it's, you know, someone dying. I've got to balance the books. I've got to deal with somebody, you know, using too much paper towels in the bath. I mean, there's a lot to it, right?
Well, you also get called, like, and that's the thing about discernment and why we talk about that is you get called to marriage. You get called to a consecrated life. You
get called to be a two-bit producer who looks like a fisherman. There's all kinds of callings.
Yeah, and that's the most important thing is to discern God's call in your life because that is where you feel at home, like he said at the first mass.
Yeah,
you know, it's like I feel like I've been doing this forever.
Any discernment prayers that you liked? Any books, anything like that?
33-day consecration, the St. Louis de Montfort 33-day consecration is I think one of the best vocational discernment prayers out there.
I think the soul of the apostolate was very, very helpful to me, and really accompanied my prayer beautifully. The scriptures, honestly, like, you know, the prophets were also very, very supportive to my vocational discernment. And then just the intimacy of the liturgy of the hours, praying the liturgy of the hours is amazing when it comes to pray. And that it's very fitting, right? Because, you know, there's an obligation there, you know, and
you're really fully participating in the life of the church and in the Eucharist liturgy.
So I'd say that the intercession of the saints, like for me, my vocation is very, very intimately tied to JP2's intercession and his life, his papacy, his charism. So having a patron that you really develop a relationship and a journey with. St. Rita was also very huge because I was affiliated on her feast day, May 22nd, 2006. And I just gave my discernment to her and she did me very well. She guided me very well.
You know, you mentioned how that year that you spent with Father Tetlow really helped prepare you because you were functionally living like you were in ministry, even though you weren't, you know, unofficially, you know, in the ministry of the church. And I think for a lot of men, look, if you're, you know, for a lot of men, having that kind of regiment, having those habits are what really helps you figure out who you really are.
Yes.
And if you're a man who's maybe married and not discerning the priesthood, but you're having a kind of hard time figuring out who you are and how you should live, Exodus 90 is a great app for that, right? It uses prayer, asceticism, and fraternity to help break down the bad habits, help set you up almost like you are living a monastic life in the laity. You know, you're reading the scripture, you're making sacrifices, you're cutting out things that are superfluous to your life, and you're making sure that you're orienting your life towards God, which really is discernment. It's a kind of form of discernment to say, look, I want to be better. What should I be doing at this stage in my life? So if that's something that's interesting to you, go check out exodus90.com right now. You can try the app out for free. It is a great app for men who want to reorient their life towards Christ and to be the man that God intended them to be.
Mm-hmm. It's an excellent program. You know, I know when we did it a while back, it just reinforces fraternity in your life and really striving after virtue. Mm-hmm. And you know, I've encouraged it. I've done it a couple times myself, but in the parish too, there's groups that are going on, you know, starting. They've already started, and you know, it's just impressive. It's a great program.
Yeah. You can also find that peace and that desire that you have for finding God's will outdoors.
That's right.
And doing adventurous things too with other men. That's why we started Estovir expeditions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, one is the internal life, one's the external life. I think they play together
both.
well.
They both generate the same renewal and closeness to God, just in different avenues.
Yeah,
and
that's
we
true.
also have a female version. FIAT expeditions are going to Bozeman, Montana, but we're talking high adventure, rafting, hiking.
It's an adventurous pilgrimage. You know,
Yeah,
it's
that's
cool.
exactly what
it's
it
very
is.
cool. I'm looking
Yeah.
forward to it as well.
Yeah, shout out to our sponsors. So check out Exodus90.com and EstovirExpeditions.com. And, I hope that this helped, certainly for the people who are discerning, of our prayers for you, and each of us should employ discernment in our journey. Because as Delacroix was saying, like the vocation is the vocation to become holy, and being made holy and fulfilling that call before God is the essence of our joy. And, the joy that I have in my priesthood and how much I'm just so humbled and grateful for this call is a gift beyond telling. Like it's something that I really try to live out each and every day. And pray for vocations. Pray for vocations to the priesthood and the religious life. We need men and women responding to the call of consecrated life.
Yeah, I'd like to get a women's religious director on here as well to talk about women's discernment as well. I think that's another thing that the good Lord, the sisters of the church.
Yeah.
Maybe they're probably more important to me
Where
than
would you be?
priesthood.
Yeah, where would you be without your sisters that you talked about?
All the nuns and all the, women's religious, that really, I think, has had a bigger impact on me than the priests, and the priests have been awesome. So I'd like to do that as well. So for women who are listening to this, who are discerning, we'll get something for you as well. But for the young men listening to this, or older men, if you're discerning, we really wanted to do this because we got so many people asking about it. So many people listen, say, and I think it's because, when you're discerning, you start gravitating towards things like this or books or whatever. Yeah. So, Father Rich, thanks for sharing that testimony. I think it was a realistic view and not a pie in the sky, overly romanticized or overly religiousized view of what it actually takes to become a priest.
Like romanticizing it is a part of the process. You're going to do that necessarily. I did it when I was in undergrad at Ave. Like I had this, amazing concept of what the priesthood was going to be, and it was not that at all. And the same thing about being a pastor. When you're a parochial vicar or you're a newly ordained guy, you're like, when I'm a pastor, this is what, and then you start living it, and it's like, no, not that way either.
You grow up.
Yeah, and it's like, just responding to God's call today and taking your steps in your journey. He guides you. He's a shepherd. He loves you. He's going to strengthen you for whatever you got to face and do.
Awesome.
Praise be to God.
Good episode.
Yeah, great episode. Before you go, give us a thumbs up. Hit that subscribe button on our YouTube channel.
Discern to subscribe. It's not
Don't
hard
even
to
discern to get over it already.
Terrible director, but you're right. Don't discern. Just do it. Take the leap.
And, be sure that you're following us on all of the social media platforms, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. And we're on Podbean. I don't know if you know that.
I don't even know what Podbean is, but you press that all the time.
I do. It's a great podcast.
You just like saying it.
I do. It's Podbean.
Yeah, but we're on Spotify too. Make sure to
iTunes.
Yeah, Spotify,
Stitcher.
Google Podcasts. Yeah, all of them.
Google Play.
That's it. Podcast Bean.
Podbean.
Podbean.
Well, my brothers and sisters, God bless, and we'll see you next week.